Howdy and welcome to the F1 Hatchet. This is the post-sprint race reaction for the Austria or Red Bull Ring GP. Sorry for the late upload for this video, as my internet has been out for most of the day. It will probably be out tomorrow as well, so I'll probably get a late review for the actual GP race tomorrow as well. But I did finish watching the sprint race, and I thought it was a fantastic race with the wet conditions turning into dry, with the people trying to turn into those slick tires to see if they could actually make up any places for the back half of the grid. It was very interesting in that regard, and I had a good time even with the Max running away with it with a 21-second lead overall. I start off with the back of the pack and work my way up to the front as normal, trying to go through the grid just to give my impressions for each driver. So starting off with Valtteri Bottas, it was very interesting that he started trying to gamble from that 19th position that he qualified in to try to go on to the medium slick tires right off the bat when it was kind of raining at the start of that. So he pulled in immediately after that siding lap, switched to intermediates, and that basically did his race because he could not get anywhere in that Alfa Romeo. His teammate as well didn't do very much on that Alfa Romeo. He actually lost 3 positions on that start of the race and really couldn't fight back through that field to gain any of those positions back. Logan Sargent started off in the rear, besides Valtteri coming back in for the pit, so that he pushed him up technically into 19th position, even though he's lined up on that 20th grid position. Worked his way up to 18th. So not a horrible race, but not a great race for Logan. In that mixed conditions, it was good for that rookie to kind of get a feel and try to get anything out of that Williams. Nick DeVries started in 14th and ended up in 17th. He was right behind his teammate Yuki, so a fairly good race for him, even though that AlphaTauri doesn't look like it's going to be any kind of threat in the race tomorrow. Pierre Gasly started off in 12th, worked his way back to 15th. He had some issues on that start of the race and just kind of lost 3 positions and couldn't quite keep up with the rest of the field with all that, the line following and the 2 people just holding up the whole packs, trying to get off that line to get into that wet conditions where it was just too slick to really have a good pass. It didn't have the brakes to get the lunges in the corners. So he didn't quite end up where he wanted to be in that 15th position. Kevin Magnussen fell back from 10th to 14th. He lost 2 places on the start, and then he boxed late after a couple other people and just kind of pushed his way back up, but not quite where he needed to be with those Haas running those tires degradation way quicker than the rest of the field. So couldn't make it anywhere where he would have gotten into the points or even close to the points. Alex Albon was actually doing really good. He qualified 11th, got up into that front section, and in fact was one of the people holding up most of the field in that regard. But then when the changing conditions started drying out, he basically pitted in a little bit later than the rest of them, where he couldn't handle pushing those back people, keeping them back behind him. So he ended up dropping back to 13th. Charles Leclerc started off 9th, dropped back a couple of positions. He actually had a 3-place grid penalty for impeding, which put him into that 9th position to start off with. But he couldn't make anything out of that car with those slick tires on those wet conditions, and was just fighting for Ocon back and forth for that 8th position for a long time, but can never hold out that 8th position. So he ended up in 12th overall after all the confusion with the tires. Oscar Piastri was one of the winners today, even though he didn't get into the points. He started off in 17th and ended up in 11th. I didn't have a whole lot for him, even though he just kind of went with the field. and did a really good job. Most of the coverage was on the front half of the field, where like Lewis was in that 18th position, working his way up to 10th. He had good start, gaining 5 positions on the start of the race. Had a fight with K-Mag early on, and then with K-Mag dropping off, he was able to work his way back into that 10th position. Unfortunately, he couldn't hold on to his teammate, who was the first person to actually pit for slicks, and George was able to get by him fairly quickly as he has warmer tires, because he pitted a little bit earlier than Lewis did. Lando didn't actually switch tires, so he kind of dropped back a little bit farther in the field. He started off in 3rd, ended up in 9th. He kind of had an anti-stall in that first corner where a bunch of people got into the way. Basically, he had to slow down, kind of stalled it out, where he was almost into that second position at that point in time, but then dropped back and couldn't quite keep that pace up with those top runner field. As I say, George Russell started off in 15th and ended up 8th. He actually is the first person to pit for intermediates on lap 16. He did gain 4 positions on the start of the race. And I also have a note here that he had hydraulic issues in the qualifying sessions for the sprint race. And so that's why he was in 15th to start off with, because he couldn't get back out in that Q2 session. So he started off in 15th, worked his way up, realized that the track was drying and good enough for him to switch to those slicks, which he did, leading the pack, which helped him push him way up, back up to the front, because everybody in front of him was pitting, giving him less cars he actually had to pass on track. So a good run for Russell. Ocon was another one of those that tried to hold out on intermediates. He started off in 8th, worked his way up to 7th. He had gotten up a little bit closer to the front field, but was really having a struggle with a lot of the Mercedes and everything else, hounding on him, and did a good job of just holding on to that position, but not good enough to really push to the front. Nico did an excellent job, I thought. He qualified 4th, held that, and actually got into the 2nd for a short period of time, actually about 11 laps, I think it was. That, it was lap 12 is when Perez finally passed him again. So Perez started off in the lead because he overtook Verstappen. But then on the next corner, he kind of shot it wide, and then Verstappen came up under him, which gave an opening for Nico to take that 2nd position, and he was able to hold off Perez for quite a bit. So Nico was one of the front runner, letting Verstappen run away with it, holding up, Perez and Carlos Sainz. And then you had a little bit more gap, and then you actually had where you had the 2 Aston Martins, and then back behind them, you had Albon holding up the rest of the pack. So that kind of gave some big gaps in the field, which helped those positions in the front kind of solidify their positions, which was good. But he was able to switch back over to the medium softs fairly quickly after his tires were degrading quite rapidly, dropping back and realized he couldn't hold on to those point positions. So he switched to the slicks and worked his way back into that 6th position by that end of the race, which was really good, passing Ocon for that 6th position on that last lap. Alonso and Stroll basically went around the track in that order for the most of the race. I know Fernando was pushing on Stroll near the end. Stroll had actually come on the radio earlier on saying, if you could keep Fernando from fighting, we could, keep this gap going, which it seemed to work out fairly well. And they had a big enough gap where Alonso started to push near the end, but couldn't quite get that gap that he needed to pass Stroll for that 4th position. Carlos basically ended up in 3rd. He started up in 5th. He gained 1 position on the start of the race and then kind of worked his way past Nico and them to get into that third position, holding off that third position for the rest of the race, fighting a little bit with Perez when he was getting held up by Nico, but not terribly. Lando was up there at the front with in that first part of the race as well, but with those slick tires, couldn't hold on to that. So Lando was up there with Carlos as well, but the McLaren just couldn't hold on to it. Carlos had a better run for his money for those tires, ended up on keeping those intermediates and working fairly well, getting into that third position. Sergio Perez, I said, took the lead at the very start of the race, then lost position a little bit later, but he was able to really do good during this, and he took over that second position from Hülkenberg on lap 12, which is really when he started trying to push forward a little bit in that race, but could not keep up with his teammate Max during that point, whereas he had a big enough gap that he could, before that there was no way that anybody could really pick up on him. So that basically runs down the race because Max, as you said, just lost the lead at the very beginning, but then overtook it and then just ran away with it with a 21-second lead by the end of the race, ahead of his teammate Sergio. In fact, Nico is the person that actually got the fastest lap, I think, even though it doesn't count for any kind of points during the sprint race. So we just have the standard 8-point run from the first 8 positions. And then we come to the driver's standing. So the driver's standings pretty much stayed the same, except for Nico actually gets bumped ahead of Alex Albon. So everything else kind of stays in that same order, with Max Verstappen keeping that lead with 203 points ahead of his teammate with Sergio with 133. Not a whole lot of points really to overtake during this sprint session, but a decent run and points for the teams, even though. So we come to the constructors standing. So we have AlphaTauri still at the end with those 2 points. They're still struggling in those AlphaTauris, even though they got a little bit better than the Williams and the Alfa Romeos in this sprint race. We'll see what they can do tomorrow. I think Yuki probably has a shot at it to get closer to the points during all the turmoil. I don't think the Haas can keep up in those point positions. And Alfa Romeo was showing that they didn't have any kind of race whatsoever today. So hopefully they have a little bit more tomorrow, but I don't think they'll be a real threat. Williams got a split mark. McLaren was doing really good, but I think their race pace is dropping off a little bit more during this session. I don't know why. Hopefully they can stay in the points and try to fight for that in pack. Alpine's looking decent, even though Gasly was having a little bit of trouble today, with Ocon getting in that final point position. So I think there'll be a fairly good tomorrow. Ferrari hopefully will do a lot better with Charles Leclerc coming back and being more of a contention player, and Carlos Sainz keeping that front running positions in this race. So hopefully he can threaten a little bit more as well tomorrow. Aston Martin's kind of look average. They were doing really good, but they're kind of a little bit behind the Ferraris and the Red Bulls at this point. So I'm not sure how much they can push the front runners, but they'll be definitely the first of the second pack. Mercedes were fighting hard, even though they were not really in the beginning, but came back into the point range. So we'll have to watch out for the Mercedes as well. The Red Bulls, I'm afraid, are probably going to run away with this race, even though Perez is a little bit farther back because of missing that Q3 run. But I think Max was going to run away with the race tomorrow. And that is my view for the sprint race. I hope y'all have a good time. And if you made it this far, if you could like the video, I would appreciate it. I will see you tomorrow on my review for the actual GP race.